you remember 2017, specifically the carry gun of choice for that era. It was the age of the single stack 9mm. The pocket pistol 380 was pretty far behind us, and micro compacts like the SIG P365 were still to come. From roughly 2012 to 2018, the single stack 9mm kind of ruled the concealed carry market. Guns like the PPS and one of the various Springfield XD series premiered prior to 2010, but it was in 2012 when the Smith & Wesson Shield really cemented the genre. Now that doesn't mean that any of these guns were close to being the first single-stack subcompact 9mm pistol. A Spanish company called Star produced a subcompact single-stack 9mm pistol well ahead of the competition. That pistol is the Star Firestar M43. Production and importation seemed to start in the late 80s to early 1990s. Guns and Ammo awarded it the Handgun of the Year award in 1991, and it sold until Star folded and merged with Astra, and then inevitably went out of business in 1997. To understand the Firestar, we have to dive briefly into Spanish firearms production, kind of the history of Spanish firearms production. Now, the Spanish small arms industry is basically dead these days, but it ripped and roared until about the late 1990s. Modern Spanish firearms really kicked off around World War I, so France really needed pistols, and the Spanish had pistols to sell, specifically a company with a name that I'm definitely going to butcher. It's called, I almost feel bad for saying this, I'm sorry any Spanish viewers, but Gabilondo and Uresti. And this company would later become Llama, which is a huge Spanish company, or was a huge Spanish company. Well, the first company, they produced something known as the Ruby pistol. Now, the Ruby pistol itself was very closely modeled after the Colt M1903, a very simple blowback gun that fired the .32 ACP. While it was modeled after the Colt 1903, it wasn't a direct clone. The grip design was changed significantly, and the magazine capacity was expanded to a mighty 9 rounds. It's a lot of ammo for World War I. The French wanted rubies, and the Spanish firm couldn't produce enough of them, so they subcontracted it out to dozens of different companies, just dozens and dozens of them. The company that became Star also produced Ruby pistols. The Ruby contracts did two things. It established the Spanish firearms industry and created a theme for Spanish handgun design. Now, not to be rude to the Spanish, but they were never superbly innovative or creative with handguns. They took guns that worked and modified them to either work better or at the very least different. This includes various 1911s, which the Spanish are probably most famous for. However, this also leads us to the Firestar. Now, I was really lucky to acquire one for a fairly low price point, and it actually came complete with the manuals, various warning levels, warranty, and the original red box, which makes it kind of an interesting collectible. So today we're going to kind of dive deep into the Firestar, do a review of the gun, and kind of talk about where it sits today. To create the Firestar, Star essentially took the M1911 and the CZ75 and meshed them together. The pistol was available in 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP. This example is 9mm. Now, the gun has a single-action hammer-fire design, and it has a safety and general layout that is very 1911-like. However, internally it does have completely different lockwork. Now, from the CZ75, the Firestar has reverse slide rails. Instead of the slide riding over the top of the frame, the slide moves inside of the frame. The benefit of this is that it lowers the bore axis, which, according to some, can help reduce muzzle rise. How much muzzle rise it reduces is kind of up in the air, but hey, I'll take any little advantage I can get from a small gun. And the pistol is made entirely from steel and weighs nearly 2 pounds unloaded. It's hefty, but still fairly small and compact. The width is a mere 1.1 inches, which for the era is quite thin. The Firestar carries 7 rounds, and mine came with 2 magazines. The weapon is designed to be carried locked and cocked with the safety on, much like a 1911. Now, taking the gun apart is fairly simple. The gun is bushingless and uses Star's AccuLine barrel to align the barrel with the slide. So if you look at the barrel, it's kind of bulged out a bit like a bell, but it's an effective and simplistic way to make the weapon work. Taking the weapon apart and putting it back together is actually pretty easy to do, but unfortunately it seems to be very difficult to put back together while keeping it in the viewfinder of my camera. There is this weird little notch with the barrel and the recoil spring. If they're not aligned just perfectly, you cannot get this thing back together. So if you see me struggling, it's not typical. It just turns out to be harder to do this through a camera lens than I thought. The gun's carry ergonomics are a bit different than shooting ergonomics. At 1.88 pounds, it's a bit tougher to carry than your average modern single stack 9mm. However, in terms of shooting ergonomics, it's actually quite nice. The grip is just long enough to fit my entire hand. It does come with these soft rubberized grip panels that are very well textured. and the front and back strap feature texturing, so it's solid with a great overall grip. The safety is 1911-like and ambidextrous. Instead of a ledge, we do get a set of heavily textured round panels. Now, this can vary depending on the generation of the gun. There's only 2 generations, and the first generation featured a more squared design. The second generation tends to be the more common option. The slide lock / release is fairly large for such a small gun. Best of all, I don't have to alter my grip to avoid pinning it down with a thumbs forward grip. I do have to do that with Glocks, Walthers, and SIGs. The magazine release is also large, circular, and textured, and overall it's mostly great. Where you run into issues is when it's time to reload. Once you hit the magazine release, things get a little finicky. First, the magazine pulls a high power and doesn't drop freely. You have to rip it out and reload. Second, the gun is from Europe and from the 1980s and 90s, so it does have a magazine safety. Now, when shooting the gun, I didn't experience any slide bite, and you can get an impressively high grip on the gun. If your gun allows for a high grip, shoots 9mm and weighs 2 pounds, it's actually very easy to control and manage. Shooting fast is a big challenge, and the gun doesn't try to fight its way away from you. I would say it's a bit easier to shoot than most modern polymer frame guns, but it is tougher to carry. 2 pounds is 2 pounds, and it weighs twice as much as the Glock 43X. Well, weight does help reduce recoil. It's just physics, even though I don't really understand physics. In terms of objective data, I ran a build drill, and I actually got really fast. Sadly, I don't have a holster for the Star, and that's a big problem trying to carry it. So I didn't do the holstered build drill. I did a low ready build drill, which is definitely going to skewer my time, but getting 2 seconds was not hard. Getting below 2 seconds without having to draw is actually pretty easy. When the gun recoils, it's still fairly easy to track the front sight. It's not difficult at all. I also fired, some typical failure to stop drills. And again, the gun's just not challenging to shoot. It's very easy to shoot quickly and accurately. Well, mostly accurately, but we'll talk about that in a second. Reloading can be kind of slow. It takes about 6 seconds to reload because you have to, rip the magazine out of the gun, put the new magazine in. Although I guess one nice feature, or maybe it's a bug, is that if you slap the bottom of the grip with your palm as you slide the magazine in, the slide will just slam forward. So the slide lock isn't locking it all that well. One downside to the Firestar is going to be the kind of raw accuracy of the gun. It's not an inaccurate gun, and I don't want to make it seem like it's an inaccurate gun, but it's not up to modern standards by any means. Now you could say that's just because you, Jolly, can't shoot, and I'd say that's a viable complaint. However, I can shoot a Glock 43X, which is similar to size, identical caliber, and they have a very similar sight radius, and I can shoot that gun fairly well, better than I could shoot the Firestar. The sights on the Firestar are fine. They're kind of small. They're dovetailed with a simple 3-dot layout. They are adjustable oh so slightly, so it's not a matter of sight placement or sight type. It's just a pure lack of raw accuracy compared to other guns. Well, its accuracy is fine. It's just kind of below average. It's not terrible. It's accurate enough to hit the bad guy in the chest at 15 yards. Fine is really the best way to describe the gun's accuracy. The single action trigger is surprisingly heavy at about 7 pounds, and the pull is a bit spongy. Again, it's fine. That's really the best way. There are better and more accurate guns with better triggers, but I doubt a lot of folks are buying these guns to be serious carry guns these days. It's kind of more of a neat collectible. Let's talk reliability. Now, when I first started shooting, I actually had 2 problems with the gun, and I don't know why, but essentially the slide didn't go fully into battery twice. Early in my shooting, maybe less than 100 rounds. Other than that, after I shot a few hundred rounds, I didn't have any other issues, and I'm not sure what caused those early problems. The Star M43 series did have a recall for weak firing pins, and if you have one, you're definitely not going to... InterArms is not going to warranty that recall anymore because, they don't exist. Luckily, the previous owner of this gun had it fixed, and I know this because the previous owner taped the recall into the manual and noted the weapon had been fixed during the recall. So whoever that guy was, thanks to you. My magazines are interesting. It seems like Star only shipped these guns with 1 magazine, and you had to buy an additional magazine. So one's got kind of a shiny finish, and the other has a matte finish. Both work fine. It's just an interesting observation. The shinier one is easier to load, interestingly enough, but oh well. The gun itself looks stainless, but it's actually a Starval finish. It's a Star's own, proprietary finish, but it's just a electroless nickel finish. It makes the gun kind of look stainless, but not really. Star Firestar M43 broke ground as one of the earliest, if not the first, real subcompact, single-stack 9mm pistols. The hefty little gun filled a new genre before that genre even existed. Now, this did get the gun a lot of praise from the gun media. Remember, it was Gun of the Year, or Handgun of the Year for 1991. but I guess it didn't sell enough to really save Star. Um, Star and another Spanish company called Astra would merge and become A-Star, but they didn't last long either. I don't even think A-Star ever imported any firearms to the United States. Star did produce kind of a sequel to the M43 called the M243, which featured a 13-round double-stack magazine. So it's a bit of a pre-SIG P365 too. I can't really find what the grip width of that gun was. I'd be really curious how compact it was. Those seem to be a little bit more rare than the M43. Speaking of which, these days the M43 is a fairly affordable middle-of-the-road gun. It doesn't really keep up with the mass-produced polymer frame fantastics, but the gun certainly has a vibe. You know, the weight, the feel, the look, the Starville finish just gives this gun a really cool vibe. And guns, like hockey players, sometimes can just be along for the vibes.